Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm so glad to see you all here today, joining us for our most recent networking session.
Hi, my name is Shannon Pittman-Price. I am a former journalist and a former teacher. I started off working in newspapers for 3 years. I used to work with high school students on journalism and getting into the field. So that's how I moved into education, because I enjoyed that. And so I taught middle school English for 6 years. And my plan was to become a reading specialist. And I got into e-learning somehow because I like web stuff and all of that. I took a grad certificate, fell in love with that, and I pursued a master's in instructional design. I got my first instructional designer job, I think 2017, at a local university. And so I did a lot of building online courses, working with professors. A lot of the professors were very reluctant to do online stuff, and I had to work really hard with them, do a lot of faculty panels and do all of that to get their courses online and to get them to actually use the things in Blackboard, which was the platform that they used. I stayed there for about a year, and then I got a job at GDIT, and so now I build training for the Navy, which is very it's interesting. You really go through the ADDIE process step by step, so it's good to see that process going through. It's not, I don't think there's a lot of creativity so much because you have to do what the Navy says. So it's like, if you think, you give suggestions, but if they have their plan of what you have to do, that's what you have to do. So that's different. But I'm still learning a lot of things for working from there. I do a lot of networking, so getting into the field, I would suggest doing a lot of networking. I'm more of a lurker, and I'm trying to open up and to talk more to people online, but there's a lot of people in the instructional designer community that you can reach out to, ask questions, and they'll love to help. I'm like I love taking classes, so I do e-learning launch courses to keep my skills up. I'm in a mentoring cohort with Nyla Spooner. And so that's the way we communicate with a lot of IDs, and we learn from each other and do different design challenges and everything.
Hey, well, thanks for having me here, because I know I missed the other one, just because I actually left the world of TESOL last year. And so I didn't think it would be something where I could contribute anything to. But I have had a lot of time spent in higher ed. And so today I could share some of that and some of my experiences now being in the corporate world and doing training ID work. But I was in the education world as an instructor for over 15 years, mainly teaching English as a second language. 11 of those years were spent at Georgia Tech. And so the past, I think, 4 to 5 TESOLs, I was presenting as a Georgia Tech representative about our experiences with online learning and how I worked as an ID. But throughout those 15 years, I've always been a huge advocate for online learning, and it just took a while for a lot of our programs to kind of catch up with that trend. But luckily, I had one of the best opportunities with the first official ID that I ever really got to work closely with. And some of the things that I was doing was already related with the things that she was doing as a professional instructional designer. But I think having experience with her creating a fully 100% online course for the first time really opened my eyes to areas that I wanted to improve upon more. I know Sharon mentioned like video editing. So I come from a graphic design background, but I also did photography and video as well. And this was one of those avenues to explore some of the opportunities that and skills that I had kind of lurking in the background behind my teaching that could really expand upon once I got into the online education world. And after that experience with her, I had the opportunity to lead a group of people at Georgia Tech to create the first MOOCs with Coursera. And I think ours ended up being like the first specialization. Specialization means like a group of particular courses that students would take in order to get a certificate at the end. But I think ours was one of the first on Coursera to provide English language learning opportunities for that particular audience. And creating MOOCs and creating other online courses is very different, because MOOC stands for Massive Open Online Courses. And when I first heard the word massive, I was thinking, oh, maybe it's in like the hundreds or the thousands. I mean, if we get 500 people, I'm going to call it a success. But we ended up getting over 30,000 pre-enrolled, and now we have over 500,000 that have taken our courses throughout the past few years. So the word massive really literally means massive. And the things that you have to think about when you're creating courses for that kind of audience is very different from a smaller size group. And so I'd love to, share experiences about that. But taking on that type of project, if I was wearing many hats before, like now I was wearing many, many, many more hats. And that, again, gave me an opportunity to kind of reflect on what I want to do in my career and how I want to take the skills that I've now developed. And so ultimately, towards the end of last year, I made a very big leap into the private sector. Having been in the public sector for so long, it was a very big transition. But now I kind of understand the benefits of both worlds. And that's, again, something that I can share with you guys today.
So hi everyone. Yes, my name is Brittany and I am from Chicago, Illinois. And my story kind of starts all the way back, I want to say in the year 2011. And it started because I was about to graduate with my bachelor's in English language and literature, as well as in sociology. And, I had one of those moments where I'm like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do after I graduate? Like, where am I going to go? What kind of job am I going to have? I remember I tried to throw in as many kind of like job specific courses in my senior year and in my junior year at school. So I took like different practicums. I was trying to look for internships because I had an awakening where I was like, I pursued English because I wanted to be that kind of newspaper editor, and I wanted to be that, that journalist and everything. But, you see where newspaper has kind of gone, and now so much is now like digital. And at the moment, it didn't really resonate with me anymore. And I realized that my passion was in education. So I recall just trying to search for what opportunities can I pursue with my degree and where can I go? What can I really do and what resonates with me? And that's when, lo and behold, I stumbled upon this program called the Fulbright program. And it's an amazing opportunity for individuals, who are recent grad students, or maybe you are a current, student, a grad student or undergrad student who's, trying to pursue that next step. So I applied to the Fulbright program as an English teaching assistant, aka an ETA. And I applied to South Korea, and a lot of people are always surprised when I say that. But at the time, I was kind of like watching some Korean shows. I spent like times, I would study Korean more than I would actually study for some of my classes. Super guilty of that. I apologize to all of my professors. But yeah, I applied. I got in, and I spent 3 years in South Korea. I was mostly in a city called Busan. And I taught English as a second language in different middle schools throughout Busan, and I absolutely loved it. I worked with North Korean defectors, helped with their resettlement, and also just taught more ESL programs that way. And unfortunately, when my 3 years were over, I came back to America, and when I came back, I was still kind of I didn't feel competitive, honestly, in the job market, because I just didn't know, again, like, how can I apply my transferable skills and maybe more, within an American job market. And like, I stumbled upon this online teaching opportunity where I was able to continue teaching ESL online to different international students. But I was simultaneously, transitioning into grad school, because at the moment I felt the only thing I could really do, this sounds so sad and super low confidence, but I felt like the only thing that I could do was try to just advance my skill set in another more specified area, because English felt super broad. So I was like, let me kind of drill down in something a little bit more specific where it definitely feels somewhat more relatable to certain job fields. So I went into curriculum and instruction because I knew I wanted to stay within education. But at the same time, I was working as a graduate assistant. And as a graduate assistant, that gave me opportunities to consult with faculty members to help them with their curriculum design and their lesson planning. I was managing and administering different like learning management systems. And those are like programs such as maybe you've heard of Blackboard or Sakai, Canvas, Moodle, that kind of thing. So I was helping to administer and manage those regarding the assessment content, the lesson material. So that kind of got my feet wet and I became a little bit more active in that area. And when my graduate years were over, here, I'm back kind of to where I started. All right, so let's do this. And I applied, and I learned about the field of instructional design by accident, actually. It just came up, the title, in a job search that I was doing. But when I read the job responsibilities, I was like, okay, this sounds quite similar to some of the work that I've been doing as a GA. And I was so happy about that. So yeah, I applied, and that's how, that's kind of my background and how it transitioned and how I started working as an instructional designer. And I work in a more of a educational technology company, and we design undergraduate and graduate level programs for different universities in America, in the UK, Australia, and in Canada. So that's my story.
Excellent. I love what you were saying, like that you didn't know it was a thing. And I mean, I was the same way. I was like, what is this instructional designer? I think I do that when I teach. And I'm like, oh, well, it's teaching, but without the students. That sounds a lot easier than what I'm doing. So I had a very similar feeling. All right, so I'm gonna pass it to Chris now. Whenever you're ready, Chris.
All right. Oh, talk about accidental instructional designers. Yeah, that's my background in a nutshell. If anyone's read Cami Bean's, sorry, kind of faded out there, The Accidental Instructional Designer, great book, talks about that very same thing. So my background is a little different. I started doing ID without knowing what ID was. And so my career, like most of us that come into ID, was that I started as a teacher. In fact, I started teaching here in Savannah about sophomore, junior year of undergrad. I found out that I love teaching. And so I jumped both feet into the schools here in Savannah, and I started teaching English as a middle school teacher directly out of undergrad while going through a master's program, so GTAB. But my students were a little different. I had quite a few ESL students, so I actually started at a school with ESL students. And it was something that was not given any love here in Savannah. And so I actually started designing and developing enrichment programs for my students because no one else was doing it here. And so that's a little bit how I got into like just program design, instructional design stuff, because I started doing and taking it on personally, privately. I've been developing design programs, instructional programs for the last 15 years. Middle school teacher, program developer, designer in the local school system. And then I took the jump into school administration. And so I actually became curriculum director. I actually became the head of school for a couple different schools throughout China and throughout Arizona. And so I was actually the headmaster of Shenyang International School. And I also built two unlicensed American-style Chinese schools for Chinese nationals whose parents had decided that they wanted to leave China. And so I actually wrote the curriculums for those. I wrote the lesson plans. I developed the programs. And so last year, I was the headmaster of Bethany Christian School in Arizona. And I started looking around the field, and I realized that a good portion of where the industry was going into online. And it was going into this thing called instructional design. And that most schools, most organizations has shifted over from being just in-person or trainer-led instruction, and actually had shifted over to the online environment. And so I actually took the jump. I went back to grad school, and I actually completed a certification or certificate from University of Georgia in instructional design and e-learning, because it was pretty clear, and we see it now with the pandemic, that a good portion of what we do now is online, and it's going to stay that way, regardless of whether or not students, universities go back. The future is here, and it has to do a lot with instructional designers, because we can do more with developing and designing courses and actually having our students go through that than we'll be able to do in-person learning. And I think most organizations are realizing that. And so I took that leap, jumped with both feet into ID. But I decided that I wanted to do something a little different. So I actually started freelancing because I also realized that I wanted to be my own boss. After several years of being my own boss and being kind of the head, the CEO, I didn't really want to go work for someone else again. Bosses are nice, but when you have to answer to boards, it gets a little frustrating. So I actually started Colvin Education, which is my company. I'm still in the startup phase. I have some freelance customers scattered around the world. And so it's really kind of interesting. Every day is kind of a little new challenge, developing courses, programs for other people. And you start to realize how much of that is really business. Education is wonderful. Great instructional design is a wonderful thing. But most of what we do in our field is we're consultants. We have the magic key. We have the ability to teach people and do things that people are looking for, solve problems that people need solved through learning. But we also have to be business people. We have to be professionals about that. And so every day is kind of that little challenge of, okay, how do we form up? How do I form up the best business possible? And you find that there are a lot of people that come into what you do that really have no idea what you do as an instructional designer. They look at you like, well, can't you solve all my problems? And the answer is no, and you have to kind of be very polite and have those courageous conversations when possible. But a good portion of what I'm doing right now is just that. So that's my experience in a nutshell. So.
All right, so I'm just going to open it up for questions. If you have questions for specific speakers or me, feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
I have a question about freelancing. I'm really interested in becoming a freelancer. And so for those of you that are doing freelance, I would like maybe some guidance or advice how to go from the education world to the freelance corporate world. Maybe like what kind of I know that's a huge question, but maybe like a couple, 2 tips just to kind of get me started.
Okay, first thing, when you shift from the education world, the first thing to do is to begin thinking of yourself as a business person. I know that sounds really kind of rudimentary, but a lot of educators, once they flip over, have a really hard time thinking of themselves in those terms. Because most of us, if we've been in schools, if we've been in organizations, we haven't had to think of ourselves in terms of being a business person. But you're essentially creating your own business is what you're doing. And your business is you. You are your market. You are your marketer. You are your brand. And so a lot of times that can be really overwhelming, because once you step out onto that ledge, there is very little safety net, because it is a matter of you are the face that sells your business. And so, one of the things that I would encourage as you begin that is start thinking of yourself as a business person. Start thinking and start studying some business, because it actually really does make a big difference when you're going about it. Second of all, is I would start to think about what you have to offer. What is your passion? What is it that when you're giving your elevator pitch to somebody, what is that you really bring to their business? So what is that thing that you really want to invest your time and energy? Because your time is your money. I mean, I know that sounds cliche, but what do you want to jump into? What companies would you want to work for? What work would you want to do? And that really makes a difference, because when you start to pitch yourself to people, when you start to get yourself out there, well, maybe it's that you want to work for company X over here. And so you're going to try to contact somebody and you're going to pitch yourself. And the third way to think of yourself is a problem solver. As I was sharing with the other group, one of the best things you can do is conceive of yourself as a problem solver. You can provide the solution to their problem, because you have that skill, that talent, that ability. And so if they need help with employee induction, well, you have that skill. You can walk in and create a course that does just that. If it's that they need a learning interaction on their website, oh, you've got that skill. And so start thinking of yourself as a problem solver, because it pitches itself. And if you can walk in and say, well, I can solve problem X for you or problem Y for you, that's it. So those are kind of the first three things I would say. The other thing is really know yourself, because you'll be a lot more successful if you know what it is that you have to offer, what your passion is, but also yourself as a business person, so that when you walk in and you are selling what you have to sell, you know it already. So it just becomes effortless when you're talking. So
I just want to add, I'm not a freelancer. However, there's a resource that I think I could probably share with everyone. And there is a Facebook group. We always have to love Facebook. And it's called, and I can provide the link in the chat as well. It's called the Freelance Instructional Designer. And, there are about over 2,200 members. And I'm actually scrolling through it on one of my other screens here, and they provide a lot of different resources. A lot of people who ask very similar questions. People who ask questions about hey, what content should I have on my portfolio? And others, ask questions about what are some design resources. So it can be a way to join another network in a community of people who are likewise interested in becoming freelancers. So I will put that in the chat for you.
I have a question. It's Lena.
Yep.
I'm invisible today. So for those of us who are trying to, just in the beginning stages of making our transition from, say, teaching to ID, I'm wondering, what are the top maybe 2 or 3 more tech-focused skills that we should be focused on gaining? Should I go out tomorrow and try and figure out Camtasia? Or what is it that I could be doing on my own to gain more technical skills?
I would say that it kind of depends on what would make you happiest to do. I love video editing, so that's kind of what I gravitated towards. But if you're looking to be the person that creates e-learning content, go out and look at Articulate. You can get a free Articulate license for, 90 days? Does anyone know? 60 days, 90 days? I don't know, something like that.
30 days.
30 days. Oh, okay. I thought it was a lot longer. So you can get a free license and try it out, make something for your e-portfolio. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? I went straight to video editing because it's what I love.
I mean, there are a lot of other tools as well that, so one thing is, like I was trying to explain earlier, that in a lot of cases, you know, you might end up wearing a lot of hats, but instructional design, although you can do everything, and if you can, that's great, you can hone in on one area and be a specialist in that area if you want to as well. So, you know, maybe you're an instructional designer that is great at assessment design, and you know all these tools for online assessment opportunities and ways to proctor automatically without having, I mean, so again, like it depends on really what you want to focus on. You don't have to feel like you need to be able to do video editing and graphic design and content design and lesson curation and assessment design. If there's one area that you are already good at as an instructor, I would try to find technology that could back that skill up first. And then once you dabble into certain technology, it'll introduce you to some other ones. So for me, like I was always interested in technology that engages the learner directly in an interactive way. So like in video quizzing or, you know, things that they could click on while they're learning was really important for me. And so I would look into that stuff. But again, if there's a certain area, and if maybe video editing is your area, there are many options that provide 30-day trials, 60-day trials. And, you know, within Articulate, if you are going to look at Articulate, I would recommend looking at Articulate Rise versus Storyline, just because Rise is so much easier. The way they've set it up, the navigation is almost prepared for you, and you just have to add content in. Whereas with Storyline, there's a lot more customization options, and you know, you have to understand logic a little bit more to get certain things to work a certain way. So if you are going to check out Articulate, start off with Rise.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that too. But Rise is for making courses, and Storyline is more for making an interactive learning object that would appear within a course. Hind has a question. What are the best websites for building an e-portfolio? Anyone want to weigh in on that one? Did anyone make one? I just made kind of like links to videos to show what I've done. I didn't create a Storyline, you know, learning object or anything like that.
So like, I guess this kind of would depend on level of comfort with some like website building services. And, you know, there are people who use WordPress. WordPress is a beast. It's a hot mess of a beast. So I probably wouldn't necessarily recommend WordPress, but there are so many easy like build, you know, it's literally like you're just building blocks and building different components. I'm like forgetting the names now, but I would just kind of, you know, I would definitely recommend before even kind of maybe choosing, yeah, thank you, Weebly, yes, thank you. But maybe even before kind of really even building out that portfolio, kind of consider, as people have mentioned, what content can you display and can you share out to the public? What do you think you're kind of really good at, and really focus on those pieces so you can show your best foot? But yeah, I probably wouldn't recommend WordPress, but I think Weebly is great. And there are a few other ones out there, but definitely consider how do you want to lay out what you are able to build. Because at the end of the day, if you want to apply for a company, they just want to see like, what can you do? What can you produce? What's your output? And you want to present your output in a way that makes you a lot more marketable and more competitive. So that way, you know, you're hired at the end of it. So.
Yeah. I currently have my portfolio on GoDaddy. And I'm actually looking at possibly switching it over to somewhere else. I started, they're out of Phoenix, and I knew a guy over there. And so as last year, as I started to build my portfolio, I put it on GoDaddy. But, you know, our Pew, I think, has a pretty good, and I'll find the link here in just a second, video on if you're creating your portfolio. He calls it 3 and 3, which is basically take 3 things that you like, or 3 things that you've done, and put that onto your portfolio, and let that kind of be like your gemstone that you want to show somebody. Keep it simple, keep it to the point, but have those 3 things. So it's pretty good. He's got a couple of other really good pieces on there about how to build portfolio stuff. I'll see if I can't link that in.